What is your name?
Chris Edwards.
Chris Edwards. What is your background?
I teach. I've been teaching for 17 years, and I teach world history, AP World History, and an English class called Critical Thinking and Argumentation,
Okay.
which is focused on ethics courses, kind of ethics cases.
Okay. What do you believe is wrong with MMA?
Well, I mean, ethically, there's a number of things, which is that you've got a situation where people routinely suffer from catastrophic brain injuries. The thing that I think is most problematic about MMA is when a fighter gets knocked out and hits the ground. At that point, it's difficult to say that they're continuing to consent to being beaten. And it's not uncommon in MMA to see someone knocked out and then hit 3, 4, 5 more times before the referee stops the fight. And when someone's unconscious laying on the ground, they're not in a position to consent to the fight. So someone may have consented to go into the fight itself, but they did not consent to get hit with 3, 4 extra punches while they're already unconscious.
Mm-hmm.
The brain damage that is done as a result of those subsequent shots can magnify the original impact. And then you have a situation where you've got young people, and I know they're of an age of consent, over 18, but you know, a lot of life after 18, making decisions that are affecting the brain that could be going on for 80, 90 years, you know, depending on how long they live. And so it's really problematic. I think most people don't understand how fragile the brain can be. It's inside your skull, it's the consistency of tapioca pudding. And damage to the brain usually takes from the point of concussion about 10 years for the full damage to show up. And those kind of catastrophic, when you have heavyweights, big guys kicking each other with their feet, they're actually putting enough force into it that it's hitting people with the effect of a car crash. So you have people that are more or less getting into their careers, the equivalent of 6, 7, 8 car crashes, serious brain injuries. And they're just serious ethical questions of whether or not that should exist at all.
How would you make the sport safer?
I would ban it. There's no making it safer. It's one of those situations where it's hard to understand how it was legalized in the first place, other than it kind of goes off of existing boxing types of legislation, which, I do watch boxing, which I'm ethically queasy about now, but in the last 3 or 4 years, I've seen on TV 4 or 5 different fights where somebody suffered such serious brain trauma from boxing that the brain swelled, and then a section of the brain had to be removed, and then the fighters never get out of a wheelchair for the rest of their life. It's not uncommon. If you go to YouTube, you can look at Terry Norris, look at Mildred Taylor, some of the very famous fighters from the 90s who can now barely speak. And everybody knows what happened to Muhammad Ali. And so the effects of the brain damage, even on really top-notch boxers, was known and should have been enough at that time to legislate sports with a goal of the combatants is to cause brain trauma to the other person. I mean, that should have been legislated out of existence at some point for the sake of the fighters, particularly when we start talking about that cannot exist without an amateur level program where people who are too young to consent to that kind of thing are involved. But there's no way to make any of it safer without it simply ceasing to exist. But I would advocate that both boxing and MMA should be banned.
Do you watch UFC? If so, what is your favorite UFC fighter?
I think UFC is disgusting. I think it's disgusting on a lot of levels. It's disgusting because when you see people get cut open with knees, or when I see someone get hit with brain trauma. I'll reference one fight. I have seen UFC fight. I won't pretend that I haven't seen it. When I'm trying to think of his name now, the British fighter, and he was hit by Dan Henderson, knocked him out. Michael Bisping.
Yeah.
Dan Henderson knocks out Michael Bisping. Bisping is unconscious at that time, and Dan Henderson rears back and hits him as hard as he can while he's on the ground unconscious, and then after the fight admitted that he did that to shut him up. Why does that exist? You know, why is it that someone could be laying there prone unconscious and then get hit with another shot? And then there's too much that's reliant on that moment when someone's unconscious that you have to have an outside party like referee to step in. Too much can happen in that, and then the fighters that get injured have no compensation. Please understand that when someone gets a serious brain injury, my wife used to work with brain injuries, it affects their behavior. And then if you look at like Conor McGregor, he goes out and gets knocked out by Floyd Mayweather, et cetera. He's throwing things through people's doors. You know, he's getting arrested. He's exhibiting behavior of someone that suffered a serious brain trauma. And so after people suffer brain trauma, you've got these really scary individuals that are going around sometimes committing crimes on people because they don't have enough of motor control at this point. Nothing in the brain is telling them not to engage in that kind of behavior. So no, I'm not a fan. There are other reasons to dislike MMA as well, is that the fighters aren't paid nearly enough, not compensated. In order to see the handful of fighters that are making a little bit of money in the UFC, there are countless numbers of backyard, ham and egger, local fighters that are getting their brains scrambled and seriously injured. They can't even do basic work for next to nothing. And the trauma that gets induced as a result of that for guys that are just weekend warrior types of fighters that are getting hurt should be enough, again, to ask some questions about whether this should exist. You can go out and find local MMA fights just about anywhere on the weekends. People posting stuff on YouTube, they're getting badly hurt. So.
All right. So what are the potential dangers for a fighter?
Well, the number one thing for a fighter is the physical trauma you can receive. Brain trauma adds up. I'm not just talking about brain trauma. You also have to understand when somebody's really dedicating themselves to be a boxer or an MMA fighter, they're directing attention that could have gone elsewhere towards that. And I'm a big proponent of physical exercise and non-contact athletics. I'm very proud that my own kids do cross country, for example. But one of the big problems with MMA is it's cultural, is that we have young men who are directing energies into things that aren't really benefiting society or benefiting themselves.
Where did you grow up?
So I grew up on the south side of Indianapolis in Greenwood, Indiana, and went to Center Grove High School.
Okay. What was your childhood like?
It was good. It was a very, very normal childhood. Went to a school that's similar to Fisher's as far as like the economic makeup and ethnic makeup. So Center Grove High School is a little bit smaller, but still a pretty large high school. My mom and dad were incredible. I had an older brother that I grew up with. Dad worked construction. Mom was a school secretary. Both of them still work those jobs. Still live in the same house that I grew up in. But yeah, grew up playing sports. My family was a big football family, and so I still coach football here. Played in college, and but yeah, growing up, I had an older brother that beat me up a lot, and I had a dad. Being kind of a smaller kid, I had a mom and a dad kind of like, yeah, you got a little chip on your shoulder, like in sports, they encouraged me to compete with everybody, and just kind of not letting size be an excuse. So yeah, they both just really encouraged me to compete in everything that I do, school, sports, whatever. And yeah, just encouraged me in any endeavor.
Step your back.
Take your time from there.
Hip, Ross, escape. Hip out, bud. Shrink your hips. Go towards him. Go towards him. Move your hips towards him, Ross. You're moving away. Move towards him.
Get up a little higher.
Move towards him, Ross. Ross, bring your stomach towards him. Turn in towards him, Ross. Get that knee through it. Get that knee through it. Towards him, Ross. Towards him. there, and